for some of you, this might be one of the rare occasions that you've come to this side of the county, and we call it East County. Everybody say East Side. East Side, right? We call it East County, and we want to welcome you to our neighborhood and to our agenda for the day, Ready for Tomorrow, the Education and Workforce Summit.
Why are we here? Our county, our nation, and our world is in constant state of change. I would like to invite you to go through this day, through this summit, to open up your thinking to seeing this issue of the intersection of the achievement gap in workforce development. As you listen to the panelists and as you have discussions, to allow yourself to think of the why. Why is this a socioeconomic imperative? I want you to step out, if you will, outside of your silos and your sort of mission of your organizations or the departments that you lead or the sectors where you work, and think about what it would look like if everybody in this country and in this county would begin to refer to these issues or brand these issues through that lens. I would submit to you that if we did that on the national level, we could get to a point where this is no longer an us versus them. This would become a bipartisan issue. The minute that we realize and recognize that the demographic changes are directly tied to the workforce development needs of our county and country, and that in order for us to keep that competitive edge, we must make sure that almost half of that workforce achieves at the levels that they should achieve so that we can maintain that competitive edge. I submit to you that when we do that, policies, funding, approaches would begin to shift. So this is just the beginning. This day is just to have that opportunity outside of budget conversations, outside of legislative sessions, to have an opportunity to allow us to think through what that reframing, rebranding could do for us here. I believe that if we can do this in Montgomery County, we then lead the national conversation. It is something that we are discussing as I serve on the White House Commission for Educational Excellence for Hispanics. We are discussing this, not just for the Latino community, but also for the African American community, for the folks who are, white, Asian, everybody. We are discussing what would it mean for us to make that shift. Because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, it is all about making sure that our quality of life remains what it is, that our tax base continues to grow, that our Social Security fund is still solvent. It is all connected. There is that intersection right there.
Very quickly, I'm with the Pew Hispanic Trends Project. Turning quickly to sort of national, where we're going to see the changes most dramatically is first among the nation's children. These are projections from the U.S. Census Bureau that focus on the school-age population, ages 5 to 17. And going forward, for those of you in the education community, in the school community, the nation's school-age population is definitely projected to grow. It's projected to grow from about 54 million in 2012 to mid-century 2050 to about 62 million. Turning to the nation's Hispanic school-age population, 5 to 17, the Census Bureau projects that it will grow from about 12 million in 2012 to about 22 million by 2050. If the total's growing and Hispanics are growing faster, somebody has to be diminishing in size. And sure enough, nationally, it's the nation's school-age white population that's going to diminish in size. It is projected to fall from about 54% in 2012 to, by 2050, about 37%, according to the US Census Bureau, will be white school-age children. So it will remain the largest group of children, but it's going to fall under a majority of the nation's school-age population in 2021, according to the US Census Bureau. You may have recently heard, very recently, this was in the news and in the headlines, that nationally the Department of Education projected that already, fall of 2014, already they were projecting that the nation's public school enrollments had gone majority-minority. That it was already the case in fall of 2014, right now, that whites were less than half the public school-age population. So what gives here? Frye comes along and says that the Census Bureau says that the school-age population doesn't go less than half white until 2021. They're not inconsistent, okay? First of all, keep in mind, this is school-age children, and that includes both children in the public schools as well as in the private schools. The private schools tend to be a bit whiter, and so the whole school-age population doesn't go less than half white. It hasn't happened yet. Now I'm going to shift gears and focus on the labor force. That's ages 16 to, there's not necessarily any upper age limit, but you know, it's 65, 70. Basically, the labor force, the working age population. The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that the nation's labor force is going to grow from about 155 million in 2012 to about 195 million by 2050. Employers are going to need roughly an extra 40 million workers, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then just the one key piece you need here to get the idea is take a look at the non-Hispanic white bars. The non-Hispanic white labor force from 2012 to 2050, the 2050 bar is below the 2012 bar. The white labor force is projected not to grow at all. It's projected to shrink. So we're going to need an extra 40 million workers. The white workforce is projected to fall. Our nation's employers are going to need extra workers as the economy grows, and all the extra workers that they will encounter will be either of Latino origin, African American origin, or Asian origin. Going forward, the projections can be wrong, but it's pretty clear that a lot of the growth in the nation's workforce is going to be among young Hispanics and young African Americans. They're not so far behind anymore in finishing high school. Major important progress has been made, particularly this century, since 2000, among young Hispanics. But the vast gap is in particularly finishing post-secondary credentials and finishing bachelor's degrees. And so the nation's employers have a stake in this. The economy is going to grow, they're going to want more workers, and they have a stake in indeed seeing that the nation's young Hispanics and African Americans more succeed in post-secondary education and completing bachelor's degrees.
In the next 6 years, the forecast shows that we're beginning to reach a peak at elementary schools, but you can see how much grades K to 5 has increased since 2007. And 2007 is an important marker for the school system. We really took off then. That's just before the Great Recession began. And so we grew about 14,000 just in elementary enrollment over that period. But unfortunately, we're way behind in building capacity for those schools. So we have about 90% of our 404 relocatables are at elementary schools all over the county. Now, that arc of growth there is now hitting the middle schools. We're going to have about 4,800 more middle school kids in 6 years. That's 4 middle schools on average. And we're going to have about 5,900 more high school students. That's like 3 high schools worth of enrollment. So we're facing some very severe challenges just in total numbers. Now, race-ethnic trends in the system, we're part of the nation, and we definitely are seeing the white non-Hispanic population going down. This is just since 2000, as I said, since 1972. And you can see these lines are beginning to converge, and we do expect they will eventually converge and cross. The other 2 main race-ethnic groups are increasing, but more or less at a slightly slower rate and in parallel to one another. This year, we are 31% white, 28% Hispanic, 21 African American, 14 Asian, and just below 5% in that 2 or more race category. Now, why is the Hispanic population growing so much? Well, we have a couple indications from the 2010 census, and one thing is the median age. It's a young population, the youngest in the county, and the white population, which is decreasing, is a much older population with a median age of 45, which is quite old. I'm white, I'm old, I admit it. So anyway, and it kind of goes together, but the household size of the Hispanic is much larger, and the white is the smallest. So these things all interrelate. It's interesting to note that the Hispanic household size now is about what the household size was of families back in the baby boom years when the majority of the population was white. We're also seeing much more diversity in other ways. Speakers of other languages, for instance. This is the trend of growth. We've doubled that population of students who need to receive English language instruction when they enter school. We have 158 countries represented last year in our ESOL population and 127 languages. In terms of our measure of poverty, participation in the free and reduced meals program, that also has been increasing dramatically. And this figure here is representative of the total population in that program, but it's important to note that 81% of these students are receiving the free portion of the meal, which requires an even lower level of poverty, and about 19% the reduced price level. Now, ESOL and farms are growing at a faster, even though we're growing tremendously in total enrollment, about 1.2% annually, the farms in ESOL are growing at 6 and 8% annually. So it's a population that's definitely increasing. By race ethnicity, the farms population is disproportionately represented by Hispanics and African American students. For schools that are high poverty, as measured by high farms, and these are the areas, the dark blue, where those schools are. It's 63 of our 133 elementary schools in the system with above average and higher farms participation. You can see that it's represented by African Americans and Hispanics primarily in those areas, while the outer ring is represented more by Asians and whites. So it's almost like there's two counties, in a sense, demographically. Of course, it's a scale between these. It's not a hard line, but very different populations to address in the schools.
Our incomes are still very high by almost any standard, both relative to the rest of the country and in absolute terms. We're still among the top 10 most affluent jurisdictions in the country. But as you can see, next slide, they're unevenly distributed, not only in terms of 1 out of 4 households having incomes under $50,000, but also by race and ethnicity. I think a lot of people assume that with the demographic change and increase in diversity in Montgomery County over the last couple of decades, that means that educational attainment levels are going down. In 1990, about 23% of our residents aged 25 and older had a master's, PhD, or professional degree. By 2000, that had risen to 28%, and now it's at 31%. So it's actually the people at the highest educational attainment levels are actually increasing. Meanwhile, the number of, the proportion of residents with only a high school diploma or some college or associate's degree has declined from 41% in 1990 to about 36% today. But it's the same story as before on income when you break it out by race and ethnicity. You see that non-Hispanic whites have the highest share of bachelor's and advanced degrees. But as Mr. Fry had said, that's changing, and we're going to see that I think Latinos who are raised in our school system, raised here in Montgomery County, are going to have educational attainment levels that more closely match the non-Hispanic white population today. People who get more education tend to make more money. That's true everywhere, and it's a very pronounced effect, even though some people say that the returns to a college education are more questionable today with the high cost of going to college. But this slide shows that at the very highest level of education, graduate or professional degrees, the increased earning power associated with having an advanced degree is even proportionally greater in the DC area and in Montgomery County than it is in other parts of the country. turnover in jobs is such that tens of thousands of existing jobs are going to open up, and those people who are retiring, they're going to be replaced. And there's going to be tremendous economic opportunities if we can deliver from our school system the kinds of people who are ready to step into those jobs. They're typically, some of them are with the federal government, some are with consulting firms, people in health and education services. Those are good jobs, and they're going to be available if we can meet that need in the workforce. There's going to be a bunch of jobs opening up. Of course, we're going to need to make sure that our graduates are prepared to take those jobs, that they are prepared to get the kind of higher education they need to fill them, and also that we're the kind of place that they want to come back to when they're finished getting their college or advanced degrees. We want to be looking at what Fairfax is doing, but we also want to be looking at what DC is doing, what Arlington's doing, what Howard County's doing. We're competing against all these different jurisdictions, and there are differences in our economy that we can take advantage of as we're trying to attract employers and develop our workforce in the future.
I've got a question about housing and Montgomery County housing policy and housing and how it affects the divide, income divide, racial and ethnic divide in Montgomery County.
We need to generate more housing units all along the price spectrum. So we have much more demand for housing that you can rent. If you can rent a two-bedroom apartment for $1,200, $1,300 a month. And that's very challenging to do with new construction because usually the hurdle rate for projects for developers for a multifamily project is more like $1,700 a month for a new two-bedroom apartment. So that's one of the major challenges we have, is making it easier and less expensive to develop housing at the prices that our workforce can afford, so that can support these economic development goals that we have.
People who are of retirement age are finding it that they are unable to retire. And so they're staying in those jobs longer, while at the same time you have a generation of students who've had, or I guess young adults who've had to move back to Montgomery County and are finding it hard to form families or rent their own apartments. And so in the long term, we need those people to form families and to put kids into the school system and to replace those people, and yet we have kind of people stuck. And so what are we doing in the short term to address that problem?
Well, that's one of the reasons why in the past we've generated about twice as many single-family houses as units of multifamily housing. Now, that's not an exact one-for-one relationship to the price of that housing, but generally speaking, smaller units in apartment buildings or condominiums are going to be less expensive as new construction than a single-family house. We need to basically flip that around, so we're generating about more like 60-40 apartments and condos to single-family, and we think about that all the time in our master planning process. The other part of it, of course, is just getting the price down, and we have one of the, perhaps the leading affordable housing program in the country with the moderately priced dwelling unit program, with 12.5% affordable units out of any new residential project in the county over 10 units. But that still doesn't meet the need, especially for this market rate affordable, people who are not going to be income eligible for the affordable housing programs that the government is administering, but they are people of modest income that need a place to live and have pretty good jobs. I mean, those income levels you saw, if you're making $50,000 in Marshall, Texas, you're doing great. If you make $50,000 in Montgomery County, you're struggling to find to put a roof over your head and to feed yourself. So that means that we have to focus on ways that we can create more market rate affordable construction.
Question regarding the stats on jobs that will be present in the future, when we're talking about the gap between what types of jobs are out there. And I think sometimes as a edge of the baby boomer, we think of white collar and blue collar. What is the white collar jobs that will be available? What are, and how do we define now blue collar jobs that would be available? because that speaks to how we need to educate and train our children with regard to that. Is there any data at looking at that and what that means as our population changes?
Yeah, some of that was what I was alluding to about in life sciences, for example, which is a major focus for the county's economic development plans, that it's not all MDs and PhDs. It's also people who are supporting doctors and researchers, and those people may not make as much money. They're still great jobs. They're still jobs that almost any part of the country would love to have, but they're not people who make $200,000 a year. They're people who make $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 a year. So I think that it's a broader spectrum in terms of income and also education. But certainly, as some of that data on the slide I showed, advanced degrees, those are the people who are going to get the highest economic returns to education. And obviously, even associate's degrees or bachelor's degrees are going to be absolutely essential in order to fill some of those skilled jobs that will sort of backfill the support for the workers at the various highest end of that skills pyramid.
But let me start right after this presentation of our first panel. How should our education institutions respond to these ongoing demographic changes? Anybody that would like to take that? And if nobody does, then I'll just turn to Dr. Pollard.
We're invading the community. We are doing that, I think, in some powerful ways with our new work on community engagement. Carla Silvestri is doing that. We're partnering in ways that I think are significant to really take the community, take the college into the community. Since 1946, the community has come to us, but we're going into the community in some very rich ways. Secondly, we're enhancing our work with our partners. I love to talk about ACES momentarily. We're working with we started a middle college with MCPS. I went back to kindergarten the other day. That was awesome. The best thing I've done in so long. And the third thing that we're doing, which I think more of us have to do, because we don't, again, it goes about this idea of amassing partnerships. We're owning our work in this space as an institution. The achievement gap is not just a K-12 issue. It is a higher ed issue. And we're owning our role in that. And we have focused singularly this year from the board to every person in the college looking at how we address our achievement gap. It's not a blame issue. It's not a festering and throwing off. Yeah, we got issues, and we're going to work on that. So for us, we are changing the dialogue. I have become quite disturbed by our tendency to keep doing the same old things and expecting different results. We've got to shake it up and be bold about it, be courageous about it, and be willing to be uncomfortable, because that's where growth really occurs. So that's what our institutions, I think, can and should be doing.
And what we all do is we not only work together, but we work with the business community. And I think that's the other thing that's been missing from this conversation is the partnership, the collaboration needs to extend beyond the educational system. It needs to incorporate the businesses that are going to be hiring students and the fact that they need to be engaged in supporting the students who are coming through the system. The kinds of skill sets, the kinds of things the students will need to know, particularly the kinds of students that are now coming through the school system who don't have the connectivity that many of us in this room have, don't have parents who are professionals, don't understand the educational system, don't understand the workforce system. We need to be able to move those students in a way so that they get exposure to the world of work as early as possible. And we also have to understand, I think, that we talk about education, it's not just about moving students through the MCPS, MC, USG pathway as a traditional pathway. Students are going to stop in, they're going to stop out, they're going to need education throughout their lifetimes because skill sets are going to change, careers are going to change, people are going to need to have access to what we offer and other training opportunities throughout their lifetime if we want to make a robust economic county. And that requires us to work in partnership and in close collaboration
Dr. Starr, I wanted to ask you about bringing a little bit more local to the school system. So kind of a two-part question. One, in terms of how you view your leadership of Montgomery County Public Schools and sort of the distribution of services, initiatives, or funding, right? I mean, that's a question that's sort of come up in terms of, okay, how does the school system then distribute its funding or focus its funding, and what is your philosophy or your view and how that should be structured? And then if you can talk a little bit about also what the school system has been doing to kind of redefine this notion of cultural competency that you've been so involved in leading.
One of the things we talk about in the school system is the idea of this notion of innovation, right? And everyone's talking about innovation and all that. And so the way we think about it is how do we create top-down support for bottom-up reform? We have 202 schools, and they're growing. We have fabulous leaders in our schools. I won't go into the stories about where's Nora Dietz at Daly, right? Sitting over there, one of our principals, the work she's done around community and family engagement to figure out how to work with her, use resources that she has in flexible ways and innovative ways, and we provide the resources, right? We provide about $2,300 more per kid at our 63 focus schools, right? We do more, so that's reducing class sizes, it's providing support in reading and mathematics, but Nora actually figured out some ways to say, you know what, I want to focus on family and community engagement instead, and has done some powerful work. We didn't tell her to do that. We gave her the flexibility, but that school community is saying, here's how we want to approach it, right? We're seeing that happen all over the place. We're seeing it with the new career lattice that we're putting in place as a result of a partnership with our teachers union, where we're incentivizing teachers to take on new work in our most vulnerable schools, or schools with the most vulnerable kids, because our teachers are the ones that know the kids, know the curriculum, and are the ones that are best suited to say, this is how we can innovate. It shouldn't all come from the central office, right? It shouldn't all come from the top to say, this is how to do the work. But what we do at the top, we say, look, we have a belief system. We have 5 core values that we're focused on. Right? Those are non-negotiable. We have 3 competencies that we expect our kids to achieve. Academics continues to be of primary importance. Creative problem solving, right, is so important in the world today, and social emotional well-being as well. And then we have our milestones, and I won't go into all the details. If I had another hour or two, I would. But we have clear accountability. 3rd grade reading, 5th and 8th grade readiness, 9th grade success, and graduating college and career ready. Non-negotiable. We provide resources where the greatest needs are. It's why we put another $1.4 million in our budget this year for ESOL. It's why we've reduced, we've increased opportunities for teacher leadership at our most vulnerable schools. It's why we provide more money for class size reduction. You can just keep going down the list. We provide more money where there's the greatest need. The second is on academic rigor and cultural proficiency, right? We go through, we want to make sure that there are advanced placement classes and honors classes and all the kinds of things at every school. Right? The kids have access to a rigorous academic course and the supports they need, and we've been doing an enormous amount on cultural proficiency. We've been working closely with our teachers union. Our board has made it clear how important it is, so we do training on it. We actually have worked with McDaniel College, and again, I give our Teachers Association credit for this, to provide a certificate, right? A certificate in equity leadership for our teachers, right? We do study circles at our schools. I see John Landsman over there, right? We do study circles in our schools. It's led to just great community building and cultural proficiency. It is incredibly important. Our 3rd strategy is human capital. We have to recruit and retain the best talent out there. And you know what? Our workforce has to start looking like our population. We're working very hard at it. We're about to come out with, and I will be coming to all of you and saying, look, here's where our kids who are most vulnerable are. What opportunities are there for after-school programs? And I love the work that we're doing with Gabe on that, right? Gabe Albernas, who I see back there. What opportunities are there for mental health? And we work, of course, so closely with UMA and Health and Human Services. What are the other resources that we can provide as a community?
There seems to be a challenge between the mission, for example, of our institutions. You're an educational institution, so you are required, you have these requirements from the state and from the federal level to deliver a quality education, but more and more we're trying to also redefine workforce development as a continuum, right? But then how do you do that knowing that you've got very specific mandates that are tied to academics, and now you're trying to find a space to link that into workforce?
We are going to be deepening, expanding, and strengthening the current career pathway programs we have. And we have them all over the county. There's a map on our website that shows, I think we have about 19,000 kids who are in career pathway programs in some way, shape, or form. And that could be, HVAC, automotive, it could be cosmetology, whatever it may be. They don't all get certificates in it, but they've explored some type of career pathway. We're also looking at really expanding the problem-based learning work we're doing. And we've started this at Wheaton. It's really, really powerful. So that our business community works with our curriculum developers and writers and our teachers to say, what are the problems that you're dealing with at NIH? What are the problems you're doing? What do engineers do at Lockheed Martin? Right? What kind of coding requirements are, we're doing coding at many of our schools. We started that this year. What kind of code do you actually have to write when you go out in the world? How do we then push that into our day-to-day curriculum? So how do we make sure that we build in opportunities for our kids to explore and understand the world of work and careers, but not do it separate from what we're accountable for and what we embrace, that our kids need to be academically prepared. Again, it's by working with our industry community. We've started that at Wheaton. We're doing it many other places as well, particularly in science, and having our teachers and our curriculum folks work together to say, here's what the problems look like out in the world, and then this is how we build it in our curriculum. That's what we're starting to do 6 through 12.
Many of you may have heard 2 weeks ago, the college received a $15 million grant from the Department of Labor to look at advancing a workforce in cybersecurity. What's amazing about that, this is one of the industries that we know to be true in this county that's growing. But we also know that there are a disproportionate number of people who are not in that space, that need to be in that space. I think there's 40,000 jobs vacant right now in Maryland in cybersecurity. So we received this grant to work directly with populations that are underserved and under-accessed in this space. First generation, low-skilled workers, new immigrants, veterans, we're working to do that. But I have to tell you, the part about this that I think to me is exciting, we're not doing this in isolation. So if I can continue to have a mantra today, is that we have to stop thinking of ourselves in isolation. We have to figure out how I take my little bit and put it with your little bit, and we can make a little bit more. And that, to me, is, I think, the essential part of this. So we're partnering with social service agencies who are going to give us access to populations that we may not have traditionally had access to. You can't just plop up and be there. You have to go to a trusted entity to do that. So we're working with social service agencies to do that for this TAC grant. I also think that how we start to talk about workforce development is critical. We have to stop thinking, in my mind, really about white collar and blue collar, dirty jobs and clean jobs, whatever the case may be, because in reality, the spectrum is so much broader than that now. It's so much more complex. There are folks who can go and get a 1-year certificate in automotive technology and make more than the average income in Montgomery County. Make good money. Have you ever had your car to get fixed lately? There are more computers in a car than there are probably in this room right now, right? You think about the fact of what we're doing in so many other spaces. We have to broaden our understanding and get over our academic elitism as it comes to this and really start to think about some things differently. The 2 last points that I will make on this is, one is that I think we also have to stop and say no more. I just tweeted a question. Jonathan was tweeting it, who I adore, and I said, how long will we tolerate 2 different narratives of prosperity and success in this county? And I was struck by our first panel, because this is the data. I love the think tank guy. He said, I'm not a think tank, I'm a fact tank guy. That's what just the facts, ma'am, right? So here are the facts. The facts are that we're perpetuating a narrative of at least 2, maybe 3 narratives in this county. And we have to figure out how we can disrupt that. We've got to figure out how we do something a little bit differently and go and work directly with populations that are underrepresented in higher education and create a clear pathway from MCPS through Montgomery College to the universities of Shady Grove with the intent of keeping folks in our county. So I would offer you this idea of trying to disrupt that narrative, figuring out different ways of talking about going to college, talking about different ways of career readiness, talking about what it actually means, and reconciling ourselves with the demography that we are. We are browner, less wealthy, and older. get over it, right? If we really want to be, and those three things, every other place in the world that I could think of, this is seen as a negative. I believe Montgomery County has the capacity to make that a powerful positive that really changes the narrative and how we think about those three things and those three things together.
The issue for us and issue for Montgomery County is working together. It's connecting the dots. There's lots of initiatives in workforce. There's lots of initiatives to deal with underrepresented populations and social services, et cetera. But they're disconnected. We're not working together. I was on a group, and Josh and Jerry and I served on that as well. Montgomery Moving Forward, look at the workforce system in Montgomery County. 7 or 8 different initiatives that were focused on workforce in Montgomery County, not connected to each other, not connected to each other. No government entity that has as its responsibility connecting all of these assets and making and attaching it to an economic priority for the county. We need to stop doing things separately. We need to start working together.
I really like that particular point. This is a segue to my next question, which is this issue of scalability. And because what you just heard is not only applicable to this notion of workforce development, is really applicable to a lot of other things and efforts that we have in the county. We are so amazing that we have tons of really wonderful initiatives. But then how do we align certain and pick certain, policy goal areas that are aligned to our economic development goals, and some of the decisions that have been made, and then scale that up so that we can be accountable and we can say, yes, we provided biotech, life science, cybersecurity opportunities. I'm just going to say, for example, in the White Oak area with the new White Oak Science Gateway Plan, with this collaboration, we have provided these opportunities, and look how many students that graduated from Springbrook High School or Paint Branch or Blake High School now have jobs in this extraordinary thing that we created, right? So this notion of how do we get from A to Z, I think is so important, and I'm so glad that you mentioned Montgomery Moving Forward in some of these efforts, but I'd like to hear a little bit more. If you were sort of tasked with, okay, put forth that particular initiative, taking into consideration what the county has done to adopt these master plans that are, focused on some of these careers as well, the land use decisions, what you do in your space, and then attached to that, this other layer, so it's a two-part question, of what do you think also other agencies, so whether it's HHS, recreation, et cetera, what should their role be in pursuing their own mission, which is, of course, to provide wellness and safety and health care to everybody, but especially, children and families. How should that be connected? Many times we focus on the educational institutions, but we know that many of the students that walk into the school system or perhaps get into the college, et cetera, have a lot of other social determinants that are affected by gaps. And other agencies and nonprofits have a responsibility.
We can use our resources to partner with Health and Human Services, to partner with the rec department, to partner with the county and say, what are the other services that are available? Let's integrate the data, let's pinpoint those needs, and let's organize around it. And there's such goodwill, and there's so many different, I think, what do we have, 903 nonprofits in Montgomery County. We've got tons of people who want to do the work. I actually want to use these data to say, okay, let's fill in the gaps, right? Let's fill in the gaps. And let's also see, this goes to the scalability issue, where are there programs that might be working well, right? So Identity, I think, does some great work. Impact Silver Spring does some great work. How do you take some of the principles of that work? Because I think part of the challenge with scalability, at least what I find, is people look to scale programs, and what works in one school may not work in another, quite frankly.
Asserting leadership and then consolidating. That's just my 2 cents. I think we've got too much going on, and we can't keep our fingers on it, and we wonder why we're all fighting over crumbs. If we just put our crumbs together and actually say, why you got to have 10 different nonprofits for the same issue if they're doing the same thing? That's just me. I know, ooh, sorry, I might step on some toes, sorry. Yeah, but we need to have a conversation. Yeah, we need to have a coalition model that does something different. So that's just my 2 cents. The other thing that I would say, though, is that we have to pick on a few things and target them. I was sitting in a meeting, I don't know, 2 years ago, and I heard Uma say something about a 2-generation solution to poverty. That has stuck with me because I think that's my life. That's my life. So when I think about one of our ACES coaches who's telling me she's sitting in a school talking to a young student, a high school student, and next to her is the mother. And the mother is listening to her talk about going to college. And then she turns, she said, well, does Montgomery College have classes for me? Ah, that's disruption.
How is it in Montgomery County Public Schools that we have exclusive curricula to which students must apply and 3 to 4 to 1 get rejected? How can that be? Why is it that the magnet curriculum, the best curriculum, the IB curriculum, the most exclusive curriculum is not available to any kid who wants it? You've got all these highly motivated kids applying to these competitive programs, and a majority of them getting turned down when they're so highly motivated they would likely succeed. Why don't we have the same teachers, the same curricula, the same quality of teachers, the same quality of curricula available to any student who seeks it? And that would then lead to the fully engaged, civic-minded, well-briefed students who are prepared for the future. That's my question.
I hear that question all the time. I think it's a great question. It's why we're commissioning a study of all of our choice programs. We have all these different ways that kids currently enter into different programs. It is not clear, frankly. What I think we need to do is, and we are doing, a study so we can say who does have access to what programs. Why are there some in some places, not in others? What's the underlying funding around all this? What are the results, right? So that we can then decide how we want to, what we want to look like in 2030 and 2020, 2030, 2040.
The school district here is looking at what PG County's school districts is doing in opening 2 high schools for English learners. I think they're working with CASA de Maryland. I don't know if anybody here is from CASA today, but and they're working with the International Network for Public Schools. And these schools are going to have a multicultural focus rather than one that we may traditionally find in our public schools, which is a European American focus.
So I'm going to be very interested in seeing how Prince George's does this work, because having seen when I was in New York City, the international high schools, which were really fabulous, having worked with some of the people doing that, there's really fabulous models. We don't have the intent at this time to convert any of our current high schools to the international model, which is a sort of a distinct way of approaching it. But cultural proficiency is a key tenet of ours. We do an enormous amount of work to make sure that we not only have culturally proficient staff, but also that our curriculum, our materials, et cetera, reflect a global mindset and reflect cultural diversity. But we are not intending right now to convert any of our current high schools to the international model that Prince George's is doing, but we will have our eye on it.
One of my concerns, and I've asked our Office of Legislative Oversight to look into this, is I know you say that you put the same or more resources into the schools in the areas that have the highest farm rates, have the highest ESOL rates, and have the bigger challenges than other schools. But what I'm asking you is, what are you doing in terms of staff turnover, staff seniority? How long are the teachers and the principals staying in those schools, and what are we doing to make sure that there's longevity in those schools?
We don't see significant turnover in more vulnerable schools or more impacted schools. It's really a lot, most of it, frankly, is about housing and transportation. I mean, it's a quick story, right? You hear people who actually move into the formerly known as green zone schools. By the way, we don't use red zone, green zone anymore. I don't like labels, and I don't like the connotation that red means stop and green means go. So we don't use red zone, green zone anymore. But we actually see what happens is in some of the more affluent schools, teachers are finding, you know what, they can't live anywhere around there, and the commute is so bad, so they want to go up county and things like that. You don't see any distinct patterns that, folks don't want to work in our Title I and focus schools. In fact, many people do, and some of our best educators are there, but we can provide the numbers by school on turnover to see if there are any distinct patterns. But we haven't seen anything that causes us to say, well, people are leaving the schools the most vulnerable. In fact, so many of our folks are mission-driven and want to be in those schools. A lot of it, frankly, has to do with transportation and housing. Can they commute to the school, and can they afford to buy a place?
I'm going to start with one general question, and it's basically, how will you define today's job market? We've had some themes coming through the last panels about this notion of, blue collar, white collar, workforce development, sort of the way VOTEC, like we knew it in the past, what are the jobs of today? But in general, what are you seeing out there, and how, in your own words, would you articulate a sort of description of this job market as it is today and as we're seeing it tomorrow? Antonio.
I can start off just with a couple of things that I learned recently from Secretary Tom Perez. There are 10 million unemployed Americans right now, and there are 5 million jobs open in the technology and STEM fields. To me, that lays out exactly what the job market looks like across America. And I always like to work backwards in terms of our programming. How do we work backwards from what America needs? How do we work backwards from what Joy needs or Dr. Bissert needs? And then you're easier in providing a value proposition, especially when you're talking about brown and African American youth that we see as the starting point is what their potential is, as opposed to, oh, let's keep them from dropping out and killing each other and getting pregnant. We look at it as, and those are real concerns, but we look at it as, where's the next Steve Jobs going to come from? Where are the next jobs going to come from? When's the next startup? When's the next great idea going to come from?
Being a biotechnology company, we have kind of the typical jobs that you would anticipate: the pharmacovigilance, engineers, physicians, chemists, biochemists, as well as CPAs, MBAs, real estate professionals. We run the gamut. We also have manufacturing. I think a lot of people don't realize, in the heart of downtown Silver Spring, we have a manufacturing facility where we need people who make sure that our equipment is working correctly, make sure that our facilities are cleaned to FDA, regulations, that we have someone who's there to make sure that people can get in and out of the building safely. So we run the gamut in terms of that. We've looked for key, not only technical skills, because I think a lot of the focus, and I feel like, I have an impetus to speak for, biotechnology companies in all of Montgomery County. And I think you'll be surprised. Yes, we want people that have those technical capabilities, but we also need people that are balanced, that are going to be able to take on, not only the technical pieces, but also the people elements of coming to the workplace. People who are collaborative and can work well together. So we ask Montgomery County College, Montgomery County Public Schools to make sure that they're preparing their students to be able to work together. People that are holding themselves accountable, that own their work, that not only come in and say, I'm here from 9 to 5, but really believe in the mission of the work that they're doing, really take ownership and pride in the work that they do. People who are creative, are going to bring new ideas to the table.
The other thing I want to say is that you also have to empower youth to lead. And part of it is that a lot of adults are telling them to kind of wait their turn, whether they like it or not. And I hear a lot of terms like your leaders of tomorrow, your next generation of leaders. And we have an outlook that's their leaders of today. Because some kid that's 15 years old, that's sitting in their bedroom, can reach more people than Martin Luther King, than Gandhi or Cesar Chavez could in their lifetimes combined, in a split second, and a lot more effectively. And I think it's really important that we give them that power in terms of that potential. It's a potential gap that we have here in Montgomery County. And I think by being able to turn the reins over to them, give them guidance, that we can expect great things from our youth.
Some of the things that we've worked on, I think the overarching kind of theme I think of is relationships, building relationships with different schools, colleges in the area, Montgomery College, University of Maryland, Gallaudet, to have a pipeline of students that are interested in the sciences and give them, more than anything, exposure to different careers, talk with different people, build relationships with our employees. So if they may not become employees of ours one day, and a good percentage of them do, they at least have someone that they've built a relationship with, that they can bounce ideas off of, that they can talk to, that they trust, to get them ready for whatever their career is going to be.
We know from technology, our change barometer has gone to more change in the next 50 years than we had in the last 300. So how do we help folk transition who have the inherent cultural value system? So what we do is we coach. We coach. The film that some of our boys developed with filmmakers helping them, they're now seeing a whole world of opportunities for employment, and they change, they heal, they move past their sense of I'm not worthy of having what everyone else has. Unless you feel worthy, you'll not do the disciplined work, struggle, and ignore the racist overtures because they're there so you can get to a good life.
And I always tell our kids, no matter what it is that you've gone through in your life, we care, but nobody else does. Honestly, nobody cares. Whatever it is that led into this, I can tell you that whatever hardships I've had, nobody else really, I mean, they might have cared a little bit, but they don't really care. They're trying to get something done, and I just want, everything should be focused on where do we go from here. I lived out of a car. I mean, it's a good story. People say that's a tough life and everything else, and it wasn't even that tough. That was a '73 Gran Torino. Thing was about as big as this whole. I had a bathroom in there. No, I'm just kidding. I did. But I think that we always just try to say, your job is to move forward from where you are right this minute. And if anything, it's a great advantage that you struggled, because you're going to have a competitive edge over everyone else. I worry about my kids that they don't struggle. At some point, I'm like, where do I drop them off so they can just figure a way how to get out of there?
It sounds like now we need to get the corporate individuals behind the success of all these children. So I don't want to put you on the spot, Mrs. Carr, but I'm going to. Because I hear the wonderful things you're doing, but I'm wondering, what is it that your company is actually putting at the table? Whether there's scholarships, whether there are resources that you're helping out with the schools in the area where you are, to actually have these kids who have all these challenges and strikes against them, okay, in order to make it educationally, whether you have a program like that. Because many internships, as some of us know, are non-paid. And as somebody who put herself through school, you sometimes have to choose between education or surviving.
Right.
Okay.
So first, we do have paid internships. So, do we have hundreds of them? No, but we work to make sure that they're across a variety of fields. So certainly we have internships. And then the other piece is, as I mentioned before, the FIRST Robotics. And we're being very thoughtful about, it's something that has been around for at least a decade. And there are many Montgomery County, Prince George's County schools that are already participating. And so we want to be thoughtful about, initially the thought was, let's go in and create our own teams. We've got people that are interested. We have employees that have children that want to, or have interest in STEM, but they already have an interest. They already have the support of their parents. And so we're kind of shifting the paradigm a little bit and saying, looking at the existing teams, the kids that want to start teams but need mentors, where it looks like their team may not take off because they don't have the support from companies, they don't have the support from teachers or parents within the community that have time or resources to support. So that's where we're focusing our efforts. People that have expressed an interest but that need that extra push in terms of resources, and that's where we're spending our time, to get those kids that have expressed interest that extra step to be able to truly participate.
I think that all of us here, if we do commit to reach out to the private sector to brand this in this way in all of whatever hat we're wearing, then you start seeing, as Joy was articulating, because they're already looking at where will the workforce come from, then all of our children will be seen as extraordinary assets. But that notion of driving this conversation, I think the private sector has to play a pivotal role. And when you look at some other initiatives around the country, they are the ones driving this entire conversation because they see how it affects their bottom line, right? I would invite all of you, as you heard all of these interconnected issues, to also please step out of your sort of milieu, if you're a nonprofit or if you're in the school system. Be much more active in whatever else we're doing, for example, at the council. We may be making decisions on land use, but you have a lot to say because you know your students, you know the children you are serving. You may have something to tell us that we need to hear. If we're making a decision about how to invest in FiberNet, you know, the story about, yes, I'm a principal, I know my students need that. So we need to hear from you outside of just what you're doing because it's so interconnected. So that is one of the things I enjoy the most about having these types of convening, because we all get to hear how everything connects and how we may not know that something is being proposed or supported, and you have a lot to say around that. And finally, I would just say that for you, those of you who are the bravest and stayed to the end, that the only thing I ask of you is to make a pledge that from now on, whenever you talk about this issue of workforce development, academic achievement gap, early childhood education, please drive that point home, that this is a socioeconomic imperative, that we have got to feel a sense of urgency now, because the face of these future and present and future workforce members are the same faces you're seeing in your classroom, are the same children that we're trying to work so hard to make sure they achieve. We all need to rally around this, and it should be a bipartisan issue, and it should matter to everybody, no matter where you live in the county. We need to make sure that we drive that point home, and hopefully the next steps will be very exciting steps that we can begin to announce some tangible approaches that we can measure, that we can hold ourselves accountable, that we can scale. Also, the slides of the first presentation are going to be posted on montgomerytomorrow.com. We will produce a report with the amazing Dr. Tompkins here, who has done extraordinary work with OLO. Many of the reports that you on education that we have published, she has led them and she has worked on them and produced them. And then we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy, and we will make sure that we continue to have this conversation from now on. And so thank you for making this thought a reality for all of us here, and I look forward to working with all of you as we continue to push this issue forward. Gracias.
Thank you.